Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Take Care by He Said, which is Graham Lewis from the band Wire. Um, this was his offshoot project. He did two albums with them. This is their second one. The first one was in 1986, and then this one was roughly in 88, 89. And there was a couple singles as well from that album. This is an interesting side project for him. It kind of combines sort of like a post punk sound and certainly a little bit of electronic and experimentalism, sort of a mix of EBM, synth pop, and industrial sounds. There's it really kind of crosses all kinds of genres, and there's a few good ballads on here as well, and also, but for the most part, it's pretty much dance music. Kind of avant-garde dance music for the time, for sure, but it definitely has that kind of late 80s production, which is a little bit thin in the bottom range, as far as the levels and the engineering is. It's just, I wish it had a little bit more bass at times. It sounds very late 80s again. um, this is their first time on the channel. I have to admit, I'm not very familiar with Wire. There's probably two bands that I don't know too much about, and I feel a little bit embarrassed by it, but it is what it is. But I like electronic music more so than rock music, and that would be Wire and The Fall. Those are two bands that have always kind of been around, and I've never even heard one album by either of the band. But I don't like post punk as much as I do electronic side, and I've had this album since 1989. I mean, I was following everything on mute at the time, so it's really important to get the CD version as well, because not only do you get two extra versions of two of the better tracks on here, but you get the bonus track, which is Screen, which is kind of mixed into the regular album. But more importantly, you get two tracks on here one's called He Said, She Said, and then also Suzanne. And those two tracks are really important for rounding out the album in multiple ways. Not only time-wise, making it feel like an album, but also those are kind of more the melancholy, almost ballad songs, but they're more down-tempo, so they really balance the rest of them, which is mostly dance music. And there's a couple sort of, shorter tracks in there. Get Out of the Rain and Hole in the Sky, which are 2.5 and 3.5 minutes, and then so on the album version, it sort of finishes out with those and sort of leaves you kind of hanging. Where on the CD version, you got the extra tracks too, but it goes into He Said, She Said, and Suzanne, and really kind of balances it out, because Suzanne's one of the longer tracks, and He Said, She Said is probably one of my favorite tracks, and so is Suzanne. Both of them are. They really help complete the album. And when I was rating the album, I was going by the vinyl version, and then I was like, I should probably include those two tracks, because I originally first heard this on CD, and it's almost, why rate 8 songs when I could do just 10, do 10, but just leave off. I accidentally actually let off Screen, but it's the shortest track on the album. It's just a little bit over 2 minutes, but I don't think that's a make or break it. But, leaving off that one, and then leaving off the two other versions of Could You and ABC. The two other versions was that, and then sort of make a combination of both albums, I think was important. As far as accurately reviewing this record. But yeah, it's strange to think this album came out 35 years ago. Some of my favorite songs are certainly Could You. It's a haunting song. Suzanne is up there as well. And as far as like the dancey ones, ABC, Dick's Love, and then also, it's such a strange name, and also Halfway House is really cool, and I like He Said, She Said as well. But Tongue's Tie is good, and Watch and Take Care is good as well. It's a pretty consistent album. Graham's voice is really deep. It's almost a bit spooky, sort of dramatic. It sounds a little bit like Falco, if at times it's kind of that deep tone, but he uses it in some interesting ways. Sometimes he's yelling on some tracks. Sometimes he's very moody. Sometimes he's kind of talking. Sometimes he's singing. Like he seems to. He probably doesn't have the best voice, but I think he does a good job in sort of making some of these dance songs, sort of new wave poppy dance songs, which is kind of surprising for his voice in some ways, and I think it works. It kind of reminds me of the Beloved, his voice, which I just reviewed recently. But a very very solid album overall. The dance beats are good throughout. Tongue Ties, Take Care, solid beats on here. There is a kind of a strangeness to the album, to the songs, to his voice. There is kind of a little bit of weirdness in there. It kind of reminds me of Sparks was a dance group, an '80s dance group. Maybe Sparks would sort of sound like this if you sort of took Kimono and mixed it into a dance album. Maybe it would sound like this. It kind of has that sort of kind of weird, kind of cultural slash just different music. I mean, it is kind of theatrical a little bit in a way as well. It's over the top in some ways, but in a good way. Again, one of the opportunities, the really only opportunity I have for the album is the lower end range can be almost non-existent, and the highs in this. I mean, it's almost like there's a low pass filter. I always forget which is the opposite. Is a low pass passes the high. Low pass filter passes the high. High pass filter filters the low. So it almost sounds like all the low end is really sucked out of it, and it's just like EQ'd almost fully out to where the highs are so loud that if you play this album loud, I feel like you're gonna hurt your ears. Like it's really abrasive, and it's kind of unfortunate, but it can that can be a style of the late '80s sound. I've heard other albums sort of have the same sort of same technique where I don't know if it's a lot of times when you're mixing albums, if you start out when you're mixing the beat, this is as far as like mixing the levels of the overall mix. When you're a lot of what engineers do is they bring up the kick beat and then they match the rhythm part. So they match the snare, they match the hi-hats, the toms, maybe the overheads, the cymbals, anything extra, which, maybe some effects or whatever. But for the most part, you get the levels on that, and then you start adding things and sort of making those fit into the rhythm, especially with something like dance music. But here, it's almost like, this is so loud that when you start adding so much and you're trying to have things stick out, that everything becomes so loud that it's just a little bit of, I wouldn't even say it's muddy. This it's just very loud, and then to combine it, there's like a high pass filter on there which is taking out a lot of the lows. So it's just kind of an album that you want to turn up, but you just can't because it hurts your ears so bad. I don't know if any of you have experienced this when you've heard this album, but it's just, and you play the original CD or the original vinyl, it's just, the original vinyl's a little bit better, but the CD, or if you go online and hear some of the samples, just play it loud and just be like, it can hurt your ears. It's a little abrasive, and it kind of, for me, it hurts my desire to want to play the album loud. As far as the individual tracks, Take Care, the first track, 2 3/4 stars. Number 2 sort of sounds like Heaven 17 a little bit. Kind of has a little bit of a rap in there and the nice beat and melody. Kind of reminds me of Heaven 17. I give it 3.25 stars. Could Use was a single, nice melodic atmosphere. It's kind of an anthem in a way. I think it's well sung. It's catchy. 3.5 stars. It's my tied for my highest rating on this album. Tongue Ties is a good track. It's catchy, but I feel like maybe I don't like it as much as other people might like this track, and maybe also not a Soul, the next track. I give Tongue Ties 2.5 tracks. It's catchy. It's a good dance song, but I don't know if it might be a little bit too poppy for me. Not a Soul is a good bass line. I really like the background singing with the girls. I think that's kind of cool. 2.25 stars. It's not one of my favorite tracks though. Halfway House, kind of an instrumental for the most part. It's a cool track. I got 3 stars. I like that track. Get Out of the Rain is my least favorite on here. It's an instrumental. It's more ambient. It almost sounds like Could You, just with like a shorter version, like a reprise, and it sort of just adds strings. It sort of has the same melody, which I think is I don't know if it's kind of odd or cheesy, but it just kind of sounds like Could You. I give it 1.75 stars. Track number 8, Hole in the Sky, 2.25 stars. And then it ends on a really strong note with He Said, She Said, which I think is a unique track for the album. I like the vocals as well. 3.25 stars. And then Suzanne, which I don't know if it's really a ballad, but it's like almost 6.5 minutes, a little over 6 minutes. It is a touch dance music, but I think it's a really, I think it's one of the more complete songs on here. Probably one of the most, I don't know, maybe one of the best natural flowing songs. It's not dancey or it's not atmospheric. It's kind of in the middle of both, but it's kind of down tempo. And I think it's definitely different than the rest of the album for me. And I have no idea why it wasn't on the vinyl. But I give it 3.5 stars. I'm glad I eventually got the vinyl because I started on the CD actually, but I blindly picked this up sometime in the last 30 years, and I blindly picked it up because I liked the album, and then I probably wouldn't have picked it up. Well, I probably would have still picked it up, but for it not to have 2 of my favorite tracks on here is kind of a disappointment. But considering there was extra tracks as well, maybe it should have been a double record. But I get it, the price difference in manufacturing and things like that. I get it. This was a side project of somebody, so it's not like they were going to promote this and it was going to be a mainstream hit or anything like that. But I think it's a really solid album. I have the stars add up to 28 stars divided by 10 tracks. It's a 2.80, so it's really close to 70. I think that's solid. I can't really give it any extra points for it being ahead of its time or the production. In fact, the production I don't think is the engineering and the mastering and the levels and stuff is probably an opportunity of it. I think if there was an album that you would say this album needs to be mastered, because I'm not a huge fan of remastering, but this is an album that probably could use it. I can't give any extra points there as well. But I think it's an underrated album, and it's a lot of people don't know this album, and I don't know Wire, but I know this album. I don't know if Wire fans even know about this album that much, but I think it's kind of a missed album. If you like late 80s EBM stuff and in dance music, kind of avant-garde, synth pop, I don't think you could find something more unique than this, and that kind of hits all the buttons. I have it really close to 70. I think it's really close to being very good. I got it on the high side of good and a 68 out of 100. Strong album though, consistent for the most part. Some good dance stuff. Definitely got to add the extra tracks to make it more well-rounded. And I think it's a good solo album. John Fryer produced this, by the way. I'm not sure who engineered it, but um, maybe a slap on the wrist for the way this was engineered. But it is a very much late '80s dance, dance albums. It doesn't sound all that different from a lot of network records or even Wax Trax records of the late '80s. Um, it's actually, it sounds more like the middle '80s Wax Trax. It doesn't even sound like Ministry or anything like that. It sounds more like stuff on network, like Manufacture, and I think even Move is probably recorded better than this. If I think about it, that was even older. Um, but this sounds kind of like more like a network album, like a Final Cut or a late Cabaret Voltaire album of the '80s. Just kind of lacking bass and kind of lacking some atmosphere and it just being, if you turn it loud, you're going to kind of hurt your ears, and that's really strange that they would have recorded it like this. Anyways, that's my thoughts on He Said, their second album, Take Care. I'll have to review their first album. Their first album was a little bit better than this, I feel like, so it's going to be a good one to review as well. But two solid albums that from a side project of somebody who a lot of people don't know these albums. I run into people all the time that like late '80s, dance music or EBM stuff, and they've never heard this album. And I think it's a good find if you don't know this album, check it out and see what you think. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this. And if I was to ever review one Wire album, what album would it be? All right, thanks so much.